This is Switched On.
Hello and welcome back to the Switched On podcast. This is your host, Akshay Koti Bhaskar, and for those of you who are new, this podcast is dedicated to those who find themselves struggling with the ominous task of choosing a career. Regardless of whether you are one of those people or not, and if you would like to ease the process of figuring out what career is truly right for you, or simply gain a more knowledgeable and informed perspective, look no further. Every session we present a different job from a different sector, and explore exactly what each job entails, as well as the required interests to work in the field. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Rupert Swallow. Mr. Swallow comes from Herbert Smith Freehills, which is a global law firm headquartered in the UK. Operating 24 offices around the world, HSF provides many of the world's largest organizations with legal advice. HSF is best known for its corporate practice, which includes M&A in public and private markets, and dispute resolution, which includes litigation, arbitration, and investigations. At A-level, Mr. Swallow took double maths, English, and chemistry, and then studied English literature at Durham University before attaining his bachelor's degree in law at the University of Cambridge. After attending law school, he started at HSF as a trainee. During his training contract, Mr. Swallow sat in 4 different departments: litigation, corporate M&A, white-collar crime investigations and sanctions, and lastly, investigations in HSF's Tokyo office. Now working as a newly qualified lawyer in one of HSF's dispute resolution teams, Mr. Swallow handles a variety of legal dispute work, including investigations into bribery and money laundering, banking litigation, and sanctions queries. Welcome, Mr. Swallow, and thank you very much for being here today on this podcast. It's a great pleasure to have you here. To start with, can you provide a brief overview of the role you play within the organization, and what are the main responsibilities and tasks you handle on a daily basis?
Hi, Akshay. Great to be here, and thank you so much for having me. So, I'm Rupert Swallow. I'm a lawyer at Herbert Smith Freehills, which is a global law firm, and I work in the commercial disputes department. I've just come back from HSF's Tokyo office, where I've been working for the last 6 months, and I worked while I was there on bribery and other white-collar crime investigations in the pharma sector, and a sort of variety of other different things too. And in terms of what I'm responsible for, it's quite a big variety of things. So a lot of it is obviously giving legal advice to companies and people who ask for it. So I might be writing a response to a specific query, and we can maybe talk about that in more detail if you'd like. And then I also do a lot of slightly less exciting things, like going to meetings where you coordinate and work out what's going on in the case, and so you can make sure that everyone's doing the right thing and staying on track.
Sure. But let's talk about the example that you mentioned. Let's delve into that. So what exactly does that entail?
Of giving legal advice?
Yes.
Yeah. So the one I'm thinking of is actually something from the Tokyo office that came in to us in London, and that often happens when you're in a global law firm. Different parts of the network are working on deals for companies that have footprint across the world. So one of the deals that the Tokyo office is helping with is for a Japanese trading house, and they asked us to give some advice on a possible sanctions infringement that they were uncertain about. So the way that it works is we, the law firm, are advising our client, and then our client was looking to buy another company.
Right.
And they need to work out what that company is like. So they do what's called due diligence to understand that company. So they ask various questions. And it came up when they were asking these questions that this other company, the one that's going to be bought, had some contracts with a Russian body, part of the Russian, one of the Russian banks. And what happened in early 2022 when the Ukraine crisis kicked off was that the US, the EU, and the UK put in a variety of different sanctions restrictions to stop companies dealing with various Russian bodies and Russian people. Okay, and this meant that if you had a contract to, for example, buy coal with with a company that got the coal from Russia, you were no longer allowed to do that.
Okay.
This obviously makes a bit of a conflict, because on the one hand you have a contractual obligation to pay for the coal that you said you were going to buy, but on the other hand the sanctions restriction means that you're not able to. And so if there's a dispute, for instance, about whether the person selling you the coal is actually sanctioned, then you can see where a dispute would arise.
Yes. I think the listeners are probably most curious as to why you do what you do. So how did you initially become interested in law, and specifically commercial disputes like this?
That's a very good question. It wasn't on my radar for quite a long time, and I thought about doing quite a few different things before. I've always liked writing, but when I started my A levels, I started doing maths, chemistry, and biology, and after about 6 weeks, I really had enough, and I just couldn't keep doing all of that, even though I had loved all of those subjects at GCSE, and so I switched out biology for English, and really enjoyed doing that, and ended up doing it at university. And I think the reason that I really became interested in law, and specifically commercial disputes, is I quite like the story, the sort of narrative that grows up around it. So I think that's constantly interesting. It's always a different story, and sort of working that through is really satisfying.
Right. And speaking of A-level choices, which ones do you think would be optimal for a career in law?
Well, so the two key skills for being a lawyer are writing and logical thought. And those are obviously quite sort of broad brush, but any degree really is going to be helpful for those. And all that to say, you don't need to do a law degree in order to become a lawyer, or indeed any particular A levels or degree. And I think about 50% of the people who work at HSF and other big law firms have done law at university, and the other half have done engineering or history or English or languages or whatever it might be. So I think the most important thing is to get good at doing whatever it is that you're doing.
Sure. And so would you essentially say that law is an easy career to enter no matter which choices you make in your subjects?
Yeah, I think it's probably not an easy career to get into, because the application process is quite long, and there are quite a few steps.
Yeah.
And all of that. But of course, but I think it's a good one. If you want to go into the diplomatic service, then it might be a good idea to do languages, or there are some, or if you want to do be an engineer, you should probably do engineering. There are some obvious ones like that, but I think law is quite a good one if you don't know initially what you want to do, but you have passion for engineering, and then you might decide that, having done some more research, it sounds really interesting to be a finance lawyer, and you can use your engineering skills, the attention to detail and the organisation that you had to use while you were creating your project in engineering as a lawyer. So I think
Right. Speaking of the negatives of law, the legal industry is very well known for its long hours and high pressure situations. So how do you usually deal with stress and burnout? And do you say there's a sort of warning to be issued to students about the realities of law?
Well, of course, if you do commercial law, you will work really hard, and I think that's the case with a lot of city jobs. It depends on what kind of law you do, though. So I am a commercial solicitor, and I work in the city, and that comes with it all the things that you might expect. and you get to work with the best people, the brightest of their year, or whatever that is. You get all sorts of benefits for being in the company. They sort of look after you quite well. But there are also lots of other kinds of law. So you have barristers who are the ones who speak in court. And that's a totally different ballgame because you're self-employed, effectively. But also, apart from commercial law, you have family law or private client law, where you're advising individuals, and those can all have different kinds of work-life balances and different pressures, and so I think you if you decide to work as a commercial solicitor, probably you will have to work long hours, and it can be quite high pressured. But I think that once you start working as a lawyer, you realise there are all these other options. So I've only spoken about what's called private practice so far, but you can also work in-house. So all these big companies have their own legal teams. So Google, for example, will have its own set of lawyers who look at their patents or look at the service agreements they have with all sorts of people, or review the contract that they're making with their clients. So quite often people start in private practice and then move over to in-house, and it's actually the people that I talk to day to day are the people who are working in-house, as it were. So it's the legal teams at banks and in other different institutions.
Sure. And referring to the work-life balance, how do you strike that balance between your life and your career? And do you have any advice for maintaining this balance?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a bit of a push and pull, but you just have to make things happen. So if something needs to happen at home, then you can even put something in your calendar, your work calendar, and it's blocked out, and then and you can tell people that you're doing something. And I think, particularly maybe since the pandemic, people are really understanding about everything, and people know that you need to have a life. So I think that's the key is just making stuff happen.
Would you say that's applicable even as a young lawyer just starting out?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to stretch yourself too thin. So if you know you're going to court in the next month, and you're going to be busy doing that, just in the same way that you wouldn't promise to go to lots of birthday parties in the run-up to your final exams, you probably wouldn't make lots of plans in the run-up to court. So at all stages of your career, you do have a degree of control over what you're doing. You have a lot of control over what you're spending your time doing. So I think just talking to the people who are sort of managing your work is really important for that.
Of course. And what are the biggest challenges you face in your role, and how do you usually overcome them?
So the challenges are always changing, and I think this is part of what makes it fun being a lawyer. So I've just qualified as a solicitor, having done my 2-year training contract, and
well done.
So that's a big step up. Thank you. That's a big step up, and my responsibilities are now much greater, and I need to delegate a lot more, and the expectation on the quality of work that I produce is also much higher. So I think in terms of sort of managing these challenges, you need to be thinking about how you can improve sort of all the time. I think that's really important. You're never the finished article. You always have things to work on. Also, I try not to take things too seriously. You're doing quite serious things a lot of the time, and so it's important just to sort of not get down the dumps or think it's all super serious and it's all going to go wrong. And then I think the sort of last thing about it is, you are only one person. So one of the secretaries said this to me in my corporate seat when I was really, really busy, and she said, "You only have one pair of hands." And that was actually very reassuring at the time, because I had about 10 different things I was trying to do, trying to keep all these plates spinning. And so when you learn techniques for getting around these things. So when you realize that you're in that situation, then you think, well, who can help me with this? And then you realize that there might be someone that you can ask to do this thing. You can maybe ask to defer something for a week, and you can try and sort of manage the things. Because also the thing I like about being a commercial solicitor is it's a bit of a team game, in that you're always working with other people, and the aim is to get the best result for the client. And the way that happens doesn't really matter, as it were. So you really don't want to have one person doing much more than someone else. So I think that's also a challenge, is making sure that you spread things out.
Okay. And are there any particular aspects of your job that you find especially rewarding or fulfilling?
Yeah, really simply, it's just giving really good advice to clients, making their lives easier. I think that's the simple, basic truth of what it is to be a good lawyer.
Yeah. So would you say that there's a lot of elements in law that are quite satisfying when you finish them?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Because you understand some complicated facts, and then you take the law that you know and you try and apply it to the facts, and hopefully you get an answer. Or if you don't get an answer, then you at least give a steer about what the answer might be. And yeah, hopefully the client's pleased with that, and that can be very exciting.
Mm-hmm. And can you describe any common misconceptions or myths about your job or industry that students may have, and perhaps debunk any?
Yeah, I mean, if you have any particular ones you're thinking of, then let me know. But the one I was thinking of is that sort of the law with capital letters is monolithic. Like I've discussed about the difference between barristers and solicitors, in-house and private practice, commercial law, versus family law, and other ones. There are so many different kinds of job you can have.
Right.
So even within HSF, I do contentious law, and that can be actually quite a variety of different things. But you could also be an employment lawyer, or you could specialize in technology, or we have a new ESG team that's really growing, and that does a variety of stuff. Or you could be doing corporate M&A, buying and selling companies. So that I could go on for hours, but there's a real variety of things. And so I think for students, it's really important to have a think about what each department in a law firm does, and what your job would actually be doing that. And I think that's probably why it's helpful to speak to people about these kind of things.
I guess most people think that law is mostly just like fighting cases in court, but I suppose there's a lot more behind the scenes work to be done there.
Yeah, so true. I mean, people watch Suits and they think it's sort of like Harvey Specter storming into the courthouse and saying something outrageous, and then just it all going right. But if so, I mean, the boring truth of it is that if that kind of thing has to happen, then something's gone really wrong beforehand. So it's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of thought that goes into the strategy of how a case works. But like you say, it doesn't even have to be a case. It could be an investigation, which is something quite different. That's like an allegation that someone has brought up that something's not right. Or it could be the FCA, who are the UK's financial conduct authority. So they sort of manage banks and other regulated institutions. It could be the FCA investigating something that they don't think is quite right with one of their regulated firms. So there's a full variety of stuff.
And do you have any personal advice as to what skills or qualifications are necessary to succeed in your position?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, writing and logical thinking are, I think, the two key skills. And there's a variety of other ones that come into it, like being a team player, communicating well with other people, being organised, having good attention to detail. But those two key ones, writing and logical thinking, are particularly important. Now that we have generative AI tools like ChatGPT, I think there's going to be even more of a focus on good writing, and the difference between okay and good is going to become more stark. And so having sort of good judgment about what's been written, because it is going to be really important, because you'll be more often in the situation where you're having to assess the quality of something that someone else or some machine has written for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's good to practice those skills and get them as good as you can.
Right. And for the qualifications aspect, would you say there are any necessary ones that I guess would put you over the edge in terms of being hired by a company?
I don't think there are any specific qualifications that you need. I think the better you can do in your degree, the better, obviously. And showing that you have an interest in the commercial world or some aspect of law is going to be useful. But I think, in terms of getting a job, more and more, it's meant to be a sort of meritocratic process where you don't need to know about law. You don't need to have done lots of work experience previously. They are just looking for the brightest brains, which they can then sort of mold or train up during the 2-year training contract process. So I wouldn't sort of think that someone should try and do a particular qualification beforehand.
Yeah, that makes sense. So legal advocacy often involves persuasive communication. What advice do you have for aspiring lawyers looking to improve their public speaking and negotiation skills?
Yeah, well, I think anything you can do is going to be good. If you have a fear of public speaking, then making the effort to do small, manageable versions of it is going to be good. So, talking to random strangers in the line for a coffee, or then I guess the next step up would be doing a podcast, something like this, or making a YouTube video. So something where you have control of it, but you're also putting yourself out there is going to sort of push the envelope for improving your skills. Filming yourself talking and then watching yourself back is also really helpful. And then in terms of maybe more specifically negotiation skills and law, things like mooting are really, really good for improving those skills. Mooting is basically debating, but it's set up a bit like a court hearing. So you know the fact pattern beforehand, you know what the law at issue is going to be, and you prepare a skeleton argument, which you then speak through at the sort of mini hearing. And that's a really good way for lawyers to get experience about that.
Okay. And would you say there are any parts of any career in law that wouldn't require these skills, or would you say that it's something that every lawyer needs to know?
Yeah, the obvious distinction would be barristers and solicitors, because in England there's a split profession, and barristers are the ones who stand up in court and make the arguments, and solicitors are the ones who don't do that and who sort of do the rest of the work, basically. That's not quite fair, but that's roughly the split. But you always need to have good communication skills. You always need to be able to explain things clearly, succinctly, to be able to summarize a position, because even solicitors are always on the phone to the clients or to other solicitors, talking things through, explaining things, working things out. So in every context, and I think probably for almost every job, you'll need to do this.
Right. And in your experience, how crucial would you say networking is within the industry? And what strategies can individuals employ to build meaningful connections that enhance their career prospects?
So networking is always good, I guess, and it can have a bit of a bad name, because there is that really sort of painful thing of walking into a room and handing out business cards and everyone's telling you about all the jobs they're doing, and but I think in a sort of less painful way, it can basically just be making friends, and your peer network, the people in your age group are going to become the leaders of the future, as it were. So I don't think you need to try really hard to make connections with senior people necessarily. I think the ones that you make now are going to be really, really important in the years to come.
Okay. And you mentioned AI and automation earlier. How do you think that these advancements will affect the legal landscape, excluding the writing aspect that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a sea change. It's going to be it's going to make a huge difference in lots and lots of different ways, and people probably don't realize quite the extent of it. I think at the moment there's a bit of a divergence. Some firms, some legal firms are already implementing their own versions, and then I think some firms are slightly waiting to see, and then are going to have a sort of second mover advantage where they can look at what's been done before and then hopefully do something better. I think that, yeah, it's going to come in all sorts of ways. So, like I say, the writing part is going to be really important, but you're going to get all these other ways it's going to be useful, like analysing cost structures to make things the most effective, or something that HSF has already created is a tool for allowing clients and lawyers to understand when the best time might be to settle a matter. So if you're going to court and the case is worth £1 million, you might decide between you to call it off and say, well, I don't admit liability, but I'm going to pay you £400,000, and that recognises that maybe there was something wrong, but not the whole thing. And the other side might say, oh no, I think it's still worth £1 million. We're going to go to court, and then you might come back later and say, oh, okay, we'll pay you £500,000, and they go, oh, okay, I think that's worth it. But it's hard to know the numbers that might be sensible to settle for, because there are a lot of decisions that can go into that. So HSF has developed a sort of fairly sophisticated decision network, using all the different cases that it's worked on. It's got one of the largest, or probably the largest, proprietary data set of different cases going back 25 years. And so you can use that history to inform decisions going forwards, and that kind of thing is going to become super useful to clients and to everyone else.
Okay. That actually sounds like a really cool development in the landscape. But in addition,
so.
do you recommend your field of work to students? And in the future, do you think it is a market that will grow or decline?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there will always be lawyers. That's one of those things. Dickens said, there are no certainties in life apart from death and taxes. I think, as he would say in Bleak House, lawyers also always win. But seriously, I think that you always need a system of law to govern things. That's never going to change. So I think as a sort of interesting, developing, stable career, it's a good one.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, this question that I'm about to ask doesn't really pertain to you because you just finished your training program. But if you were to start your career over again, is there anything that you would change? And would you stay in the same sector?
Yeah, so like you say, I have just started my career in some ways, and in other ways I've been on this path since school, so for the last 10 years, and I don't think there are many things I'd change. But like I said, I switched over from biology to English after having done it for biology for 6 weeks, and I think it's really important to sort of listen to yourself and listen to what are the things that give you energy or that you really enjoy doing, and then do more of those, and then that will lead you to somewhere that you're happy with. And so I think I'm fairly happy with where I am at the moment, and so I don't think I would particularly change anything, but I think keeping that awareness of what it is that you like or think that you might like, and then doing more of that is good. You can kind of think of these things as experiments. So I tried biology, actually wasn't really for me, tried English, turned out to be the thing, and then tried out a bit of law. Oh yeah, I like the sound of that. Did corporate M&A in my second seat, that wasn't so much for me. Did the disputes part of it, that was more for me. And so I think it's a constant sort of series of experiments that you're running.
It's really good to hear that you wouldn't change too much.
Yeah.
Where do you see yourself, as well as the industry, in a few years' time?
Well, it's very hard to predict the future. The cop-out answer is to say, come back to me in 10 years' time. But I don't see myself changing very much about sort of what I'm doing at the moment. So I think in a few years' time, I'd probably still be doing roughly the same thing. I think the legal industry is going through a bit of a period of change at the moment. In London, at least, a lot of US law firms have joined the party, and they're trying to grow their practices in London a lot, and that's led to some disruption in how people are hired, salaries, what people think is important from a job, and so probably that's going to keep being the case in the next few years, I'd imagine.
Okay. And lastly, do you think you could share any resources or organizations that students can explore to learn more about your industry?
Yeah, so there's a very good podcast by Joshua Rosenberg called Law in Action on the BBC, which is quite good for sort of general topical legal issues. And then there are, depending on what you're interested in, I would have a look at following either the blogs or the podcasts of some of the top law firms. So I would say HSF, Herbert Smith Freehills, where I work, Freshfields, Linklaters, Slaughter and May, Allen Overy, Clifford Chance, and many others produce really good content on all sorts of different things, and then maybe start really broad, and then as you find things more interesting, cut out the noise, as it were.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Swallow. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all we have for today's podcast, ladies and gentlemen. A big thank you once again to Mr. Swallow for agreeing to be a part of this podcast, and until next time, this is the Switched On Podcast.